claws clung to her fingertips. The sharp beak pecked for the biggest crumb, and he hopped back onto the windowsill to eat it. She sat in the armchair beside the bed and covered herself with the blanket she had once crocheted with her grandmother. The squares Libby had made looked more like spider webs, but they had been included. The cottage smelled like laundry soap and baking. Her mother's response to her father's illness was to cook. The more she baked, the less he ate. The cottage pressed in on Libby like a hug. The cracked ceilings, the deep windowsills, the masses of flowers nodding outside between the wall and the beach beyond enfolded her. The floorboards were patchworked with rugs and scraps of carpet, light curtains billowing into the room in the wind. She curled up in the chair, listening to the roar of the waves at high tide, reaching almost to the dunes surrounding the cottage. For a moment she thought she heard a voice, calling, whispering. Something compelled her to look at her grandfather. He looked smaller than before, as if he'd shrunk away. There was a smile on his face. He looked peaceful, his eyes just open a little. His gaze was distant. Libby slid off the chair and walked back gently. As she reached the window, the robin came back, sitting on the windowsill, his head to one side as if to ask the question. She took a deep breath and spoke to the bird. "He died," Libby whispered to him, before she turned to call to her mother downstairs. Chapter 1. Present day, 19th of April. The helicopter took off very gently, hardly a ripple on Olivia Elliott's coffee, but the sound was horrendous. In all her years growing up on the islands, Libby had never arrived by air before. She looked down at the island she called home, sitting in the silvery blue water, just poking their green heads above the mist. Libby had always loved their iconic shapes. The fat crab of her destination, St. Brannock's, St. Petrock's with its internal lake and tropical gardens, and the hook-shaped Morwen Island sticking up, rocky and rugged. Her trip back to the islands was being paid for by the production company, along with an allowance for accommodation, which was enough to rent her parents' holiday let, which had once been her granddad's cottage. He had died 8 years ago, and although her parents had stripped it out and used it as a holiday rental, it was more shabby than chic. The cottage needed a lot of work to bring it up to the standards that holidaymakers expected. The ceilings and windows were low and irregular. The stairs and floors creaked and sand drifted in the door. But every window had a stunning view of the dunes or the rolling sea. She would have to manage with the old plumbing and kitchen while the rewiring work was being done, but the back bedroom would make a great studio for her work. She had adored her granddad, and she longed to be in his home once more, to feel close to him again. It would be like stepping back in time to her childhood, when her beloved grandparents had lived there. Libby looked back at herself in the salt-crusted window of the helicopter. She looked into her own pale blue eyes, wide under dark hair. She had treated herself to dyeing it on her 29th birthday, and her mother hated her new colour. She was always arguing she should go back to her natural shade. But whatever she called it, strawberry blonde, auburn, nothing could get around the fact that Libby was ginger. And anyway, Libby thought brunettes looked more serious, more professional, which felt more important to her now she had her new job. But her mum had one thing right, Libby thought as she gazed at her reflection. Dark hair made her look pale. She looked beyond her reflection and out of the window, hugging the idea of her new job. Costumer on the new show, Polzeth Manor, a Victorian tale of Cornish folk cruising in the slipstream of Poldark. She'd been working with the BBC for several years, mostly doing repairs and adapting costumes for minor characters. But now they had a new male character coming in, played by the engaging Callum Michaels, and she would be meeting him in Penzance in a few days to take his measurements and explain the designer's plan for his character. The helicopter had reached a height that offered a view over the distant islands. No matter how long she was away, she always yearned for just a day or two back home. A voice next to her.